In February 1964, American teens discovered something new. Many of these teens had been among Disneyland's first customers when the park opened 9 years earlier. Many had been loyal viewers of the Mickey Mouse Club TV show, and many had gone with their families to the cinema over the holidays to see Disney's latest animated feature, The Sword in the Stone. Now, however, as the Ed Sullivan Show streamed into their living rooms, Disney was far from their minds, as they were enraptured by 4 other mop-topped Englishmen. The Beatles were making their appearance on the show, and it was just the beginning of the phenomenon that we now know as Beatlemania. In the coming years, Beatlemania only continued to grow, and Hollywood sought to cash in. Soon, the Beatles appeared in a feature film and even had their own Saturday morning cartoon series. Disney would have been foolish not to try to collaborate with the Beatles, and as the studio developed its next animated feature, The Jungle Book, they came up with an idea to include the Fab Four in the film. The Beatles would voice a quartet of vultures that would befriend the protagonist, Mowgli, and sing a rock song written by legendary Disney composers, the Sherman Brothers.
When you're done in, who hangs around to lock you up when you are down?
Disney pitched the idea to the band, who promptly rejected it. The Jungle Book kept its Beatles-esque vultures, but they ditched the rock song in favor of a barbershop number. John was running the show at the time, Richard Sherman recalled, and he said dismissively, "I don't want to do an animated film." 3 years later, they did Yellow Submarine, so you can see how things change. Sherman was correct that the Beatles did appear in a full-length animated movie, Yellow Submarine. However, he was incorrect to believe that their attitude toward animation had changed. The Beatles never really cared for animation. They disliked their Saturday morning cartoon and never lent their voices to that show. The only reason they agreed to do Yellow Submarine was to fulfill their contract with United Artists. They had done 2 movies for the studio, but they had promised 3. They only appeared in a brief live-action segment at the end of the movie and had voice actors play their roles for the remainder of the runtime. When the band had to supply songs for the movie's soundtrack, they chose tracks that they themselves considered rubbish. Yellow Submarine premiered a year after The Jungle Book, and it surprised everyone, the Beatles included, when it became a success. Critics praised the movie's unique and decidedly un-Disney-like look. However, while the Beatles made their mark on the world of animation, they missed their chance to make history. Little did they know that by turning down The Jungle Book, they were also turning down the chance to appear in Walt Disney's last animated movie. Walt passed away before the film premiered. The Beatles met their own sort of end when the band broke up in the early 70s. John Lennon signed the paperwork that made the breakup official, and he did so at, of all places, Walt Disney World's Polynesian resort where he was vacationing. John and fellow Beatle George later passed away, dashing any hopes of a Beatles reunion. However, Disney wasn't done trying to merge the power of the Fab Four with that of the Mouse House. At the 2009 D23 convention, Disney announced that they would be remaking Yellow Submarine, this time in 3D. Robert Zemeckis would direct the movie and use the same mocap style of animation that he'd used in movies like The Polar Express and A Christmas Carol. While the Beatles wouldn't be directly involved in the movie themselves, their likenesses and their music certainly would be. It looked like the world of Disney and the world of the Beatles was finally about to come together. However, after Robert Zemeckis' movie Mars Needs Moms, which used the same animation style he'd planned to use in Yellow Submarine, bombed at the box office, Disney canceled the Beatles picture. However, a few years later, another Disney remake gave Disney another chance to snag that long elusive Beatles collaboration. Jon Favreau was making a remake of Disney's The Jungle Book, and he saw a chance to get the 2 remaining Beatles to play the roles that they'd rejected for the original film. However, he too was unsuccessful, and the vultures were cut from the movie. "We don't have the Beatle vultures," Favreau told reporters. "I did talk about trying to get Paul and Ringo into the film because they wanted the Beatles for the original, but I couldn't get them. We came to the idea too late. Maybe if there's a sequel." By this time, however, the 2 remaining Beatles were in their 70s, and rather than making a Jungle Book sequel, Jon Favreau quickly began work remaking The Lion King, making the idea that Paul and Ringo would ever appear as singing vultures more unlikely than ever. But then something remarkable happened. Someone finally got one of the Beatles to appear in a Disney movie that came out a year following The Jungle Book. This person succeeded where Jon Favreau, Robert Zemeckis, and even Walt Disney himself had failed. So, who accomplished this feat? None other than Captain Jack Sparrow. Johnny Depp had appeared in several of Paul McCartney's music videos, and when it came time to make the 5th Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Johnny asked Paul to return the favor. Since another British rocker, Keith Richards, had played Jack Sparrow's father in the series, it only made sense for McCartney to play Jack Sparrow's uncle, Uncle Jack. McCartney donned full pirate regalia for his cameo appearance and added a little bit of Beatles song power to his role.
Hold on, stop! Dad? Uncle Jack! Jackie boy!
After many decades and missed opportunities, two of the biggest forces in pop culture finally crossed paths, if only for a moment. The future could bring more collaboration. Disney has released several documentaries about the Beatles on Disney+, and the Beatles' music remains popular, so it's always a possibility that the Beatles, or at least some of their work, could appear in future Disney movies, shows, or even parks attractions. However, there has been no news of any plans for Paul or Ringo to collaborate with Disney on any upcoming projects, so it appears that with Paul McCartney's Pirates appearance, Disney and the Beatles finally reached the end of their long and winding road. But who knows? If Disney develops another Jungle Book project, they may finally get those vulture cameos to happen. But perhaps it's best to just let it be.